This is a Viva PR podcast.
I really get concerned when people say comms is dumbing it down, because we're not. Did I ever suspect in defence you'd walk through a corridor and there'd be a slogan saying show us your white bits? I think we've got to move as an industry to be more intelligence led. Put in the ingredients, employee experience, and that's where you get the power.
Welcome to PR in the Real World with me, Tony Garner, and my guest today is Alison Ramsay, who's the Corporate Communications and Employee Experience Director at AWE. Alison's had a fantastic career. She started out in the typing pool at BAE Systems before rising through the ranks to become the Communications Director. In this episode, we're talking about all sorts of things, like why simplifying isn't dumbing down, and we discuss how us as comms folk need to treat employees like adults. And we also talk about how we need to get serious about data. Let's get into it. So, Alison, thank you for coming to join us.
Thank you.
Obviously, I know you from your work at BAE Systems and AWE more latterly, and at BAE, the Air sector, and AWE, for me anyway, they're about as complex as it gets, both kind of the technical knowledge that you need and then organisationally the structures. For that brings with it loads of comms challenges, I'm guessing, and one of them being that the ability to kind of take those complex worlds and explain them to different audiences. I mean, you might be talking to like high-level regulators and government officials at one end, and then shop floor engineers and another part of the spectrum. How do you kind of do all that, and how do you kind of stay sane doing it?
It's hard. It is hard. One of the reflections I have, it's not about dumbing it down. And I think I really get concerned when people say comms is dumbing it down. Yeah. Because we're not. We try really, really hard to understand that complexity, but then think of the audience. Because you need to understand what that audience needs and wants from that piece of communication. So it might be different for the regulator, it might be different for the person who works on the shop floor. Yeah. But it's what they need and what they want from that piece of information. And I think sometimes, because I work with a lot of engineers and scientists, and they're the brightest brains in Britain, who I work with, but it's very personal to them when they're explaining that complexity, and they hold it dear. Yeah. But our job is to work with them and try and get the essence of it based on what the audience needs. And I think that's a big difference. I really think it's a big difference.
And I think there's you often, when we've worked together in the past, spoiler alert, Alison and I, we've worked together for a while now. You've always valued a one-pager, boiling things down into that essence. Is that an approach that's worked for you, or is that just a symptom of busy times and trying to kind of...
No, I'm obsessed with a good narrative. I am absolutely obsessed. I want to have one-page clarity on what we are communicating. I think once you've landed on that narrative, you can then look at how you turn that narrative into something digestible, understandable, engaging, impactful for the various audiences. But you have to start off with a core. And I'll be honest, working with a new team, I'm constantly, what's the narrative? Yeah. What's the narrative? And I think they're fed up of me, to be honest, but it's something that I hold dear to my heart, because if you understand what you're trying to get across, everything else can build from it. Everything.
And over the years, some of the projects that you've thrown our way have been those examples of complex communication or bad EQ communication, where people have just hidden behind a corporate veneer to send out a message without thinking that there's a human at the other end. Or, can you talk about some of those that make your blood boil at times, or you? you're tearing your hair out? Not specifically because of the nature of your work, but...
So when you're talking about complexity, I think there's technical complexity, and when you're working with really great minds, they want to explain their technical solutions.
Yeah.
I think that is easier. I genuinely do. You work with an SME, and you work hard to explain an engine or a supercomputer, and I think that's the easiest bit.
Yeah.
The hardest bit is organisation complexity, and what I mean by that is, working with the organisation to articulate something that might not have a clear answer, or a answer that isn't black and white. And I think that is the biggest challenges for corporate communications leaders today. It's around that organisation complexity. And my big driver is we're all humans. We're all on this earth as human beings. And I think the second part is we're adults.
Right.
And I remember a trade union leader saying to me a few years ago, Alison, when we're at home, we pay our own mortgages, we sort our own bills out, we bring up children, but when we walk through the gates, you expect us to remove our brains and you tell us what to do. And I'm like, we're adults. And I think we shy away sometimes around having those adult conversations where we haven't got it is really complex. It is really complex and we haven't got all the answers. But having that conversation adult to adult, I think it's absolutely fine. It doesn't need to be tied up in a bow. Corporate comms is not responsible for communicating everything to everyone.
Right. Or hidden behind acronyms and...
or being too scared to have the conversation. I'm super proud of the Draw the Line campaign that we worked on together. This was around stamping out poor behaviours in the workplace, and we were bold and brave in that. Did I ever suspect in defence you'd walk through a corridor and there'd be a slogan saying, show us your white bits? That was one of those stop and think moments for us as an organisation. So treat them like adults, because that is the sort of bad behaviours that adults say every day. So put it right in the face.
And it's the kind of language that they actually use as opposed to,
corporate BS.
And I guess there's the other line that you can go too far. And it was before the red light came on, I was recalling a time where I upset a lot of engineers by describing one of the processes that they'd taken years to develop and install as like baking a cake, and they were fuming, quite rightly. But I guess there's that potential for oversimplification. And
there is, but again, it's about your audience. If the audience for that piece of communication was the general public or the wider organisation who doesn't have a knowledge of engineering and science, we've got finance people, we've got HR people. Not everybody lives in that world, so it depends what you're trying to achieve.
Exactly.
If you're talking to a group of engineers and scientists, I wouldn't advise that you describe it as baking a cake, given that they've all got qualifications up the yin yang, and you're saying it's like baking a cake.
Fair point. I think. The other complexity in those organisations is what you said. You're dealing with, groups of many thousands strong, but very disparate. Often in disparate locations, physically, but also a vast range of job skills and talents across a range, and that must be a hard work to kind of like map out how you're going to kind of...
it is really hard work, and I think as a industry, I'm not sure we've cracked it yet. I genuinely haven't. I think we've got to move as an industry to be more intelligence-led, really using data and understanding it. Look, we've all been doing employee surveys for years.
Yeah.
But I think it's more than that, because you've got to start connecting the data points. So what data points has HR got? What data points has comms got? And what's it telling us about what we need to communicate about, when and how? Yeah. I think, it's just my personal view, I think as an industry, corporate comms has to get better with data. I fundamentally believe that.
One of the things that you kind of pioneered looking internally was looking at personas and not just treating work groups as, all right, that's the shop floor lads and girls, that's the office typing pool, that, you know, so we'll select them like that, but a much kind of wider look at people. Was that part of your thinking, that we're not getting this right?
Do you know the best thing I ever did? People who I work with in corporate comms describe it as my sabbatical.
Yeah.
But I left comms for about 8 years. I moved into HR, I moved into project management and change management, and I left corporate comms for 8 years. And I can truly say it was the best thing I ever did. Because when you're in corporate comms, sometimes it's around quantity.
Yeah.
Quantity of communications. And when I went to work in the business, I'm like, what on earth is all this stuff that they're bombarding me with? What do you want me to do with it? What do you want me to think? What do you want me to feel? What do you want me to do? And when you come out of the bubble of corporate comms and go and sit in the business and realise, people aren't on the internet 8 hours a day looking at my beautiful content.
Yeah.
They're not. They're doing real life jobs.
Yeah.
They're working really hard, and don't get me wrong, there are people who are on it all day.
Yeah.
But there are people who just have a snapshot every now and again. And I don't think as corporate comms we think through the individuals. So personas for me are really important, but I worry sometimes we bucket people in roles. So this is how we communicate to an engineer.
Yeah.
This is how we communicate to a HR person. Actually, every HR person is different.
Yeah.
Every engineer is different, you know.
Yeah, I mean, well, there is a real danger, isn't there? Of creating a communications function in our own likeness, and you know, I love podcasts, so let's, the podcast is a great solution.
For everybody who works in corporate comms, when I left, I'll be honest, I didn't look at the internet for about 3 months, and I'm just being brutally honest. The value I got was when I got a briefing off my leader.
No, it's interesting, isn't it, that perspective? So have you been able to kind of take that perspective with you, even though you've kind of had comms thrust back in your lap in your current role?
I hate describing it as this, but it's a journey. Yeah. I think it's a real shift for the corporate comms industry to really think about, what do we want people or our audiences to do with the information that we are providing them? And one of the challenges we've got is corporations like communicating about process. You know, performance management, fill in this form, hold us objective setting discussion, put it in the system. You know, how do you turn that on its head? Because actually what it's about is being really clear with employees about what the expectation is and allowing them to showcase how brilliant they're doing against those expectations, and also where they need some help. That is very different than fill in this box, pass this process step. We've got to think differently.
And that must frustrate you when you see that.
It does. It really annoys me.
Yeah. but it's been built up over years because that was viewed good practice. And I guess as well, going back to that reflection on how we all kind of receive and take information and take it in. For some people, that's needed and necessary, and that fragmentation is something that we've seen across our respective careers. That there isn't always the right one channel. There's a mix of what you need.
Absolutely.
So that's the corporate comms world put to bed. I think. I mean, it's really fascinating though, because I think what you're saying is that we all need to take a long, hard look at some of the tactical solutions and some of the tones that we use, and some of the things that are tried and tested, or that just we get out of our toolbox all the time because we always do it, aren't necessarily landing with the people that we are supposed to be communicating with.
No, and that I come back to, that's why you need data.
Yeah.
Did my old comms team know that Alison, who was leading a team of 50 or so people, had never looked at the intranet for 3 months, and therefore key communications hadn't been shared? Yeah. Look, equally, as a manager in the business, I was at fault.
Yeah.
I was at fault. So that comes back to, how are we educating leaders about their role as communicators? So that's a different angle completely on it.
Yeah.
That I was being very selfish, not making best use of that comms to engage with my team.
And there's a real push as well to be, and we're going to move on to this, to be a solid voice in the room at director level, to be giving sage advice to leaders. And at the same time, we all kind of suffer with that everyone's a comms expert experience. And if we aren't strong enough in our convictions and understanding of our space, then I guess they've got every right to chip in with their two penneth as well.
Yeah, we need a voice at the table.
Yeah.
Because I think good organisations recognise the value that corporate comms brings to the table.
Yeah. We were talking beforehand about you as an individual and your particular journey. I think it's probably worth sharing with viewers and listeners how you started your career at BAE and then went on to become Director of Communications. It was quite inspiring, but also there must have been moments where you were going, what am I doing here?
Gosh, you're making me feel really old. So I'm one of 5, the youngest of 5 children, and college and university was not part of the path that we went on. Really clear, get to work, get a wage and pay your board.
Yeah.
Not in a negative way, it was just that way back then.
Yeah.
Most of my family worked at BAE. So where do you apply? BAE. So I joined there 3 weeks after I finished school, and I was there 34 years.
Wow.
That's a long time. I'll get on to why I left.
Yeah.
So I joined at 16. I joined in the typing pool, and I have to say I'm one of the fastest typers in town. I am a super typer to this day, and I'm still a whiz at shorthand. Very proud of that fact. But actually, I think that gave me a really good grounding on what it feels like to be, I can say it now because there's no typing pools, the bottom of the rung, and how people treated you. And it just wasn't pleasant sometimes. I love the job, by the way, but...
Just explain to people, because you've told me in the past the geographical location of the typing pool when you started.
Yeah, it was a very male-dominated world back then in 1989, and there was a shop floor, and the typing pool was sat in the middle of the shop floor, and we were all females in the typing pool. I'd say the eldest was only about 35, 40. And we had a supervisor who was fabulous, but she made us all very clear. You came in with a face full of makeup, you had to wear a skirt, you had to wear heels. And I just remember tottering down the shop floor. And I know they're really different times, but God, we enjoyed we enjoyed those days, because you were just a bunch of girls in the middle of a male dominated, and we just had fun. Just had fun. And then I progressed to being a PA. Again, that gives you a really good insight about leaders and management and what they need to be able to inspire and communicate with their teams. And then my then manager encouraged me to apply for a job in comms, and I applied. And over the following years, do you know what? I just worked hard. I worked hard. I was seconded to other sites. I worked across most parts of BA systems at that time. So that's my journey. And then I turned 50, had a bit of a midlife crisis, decided I didn't want to start and finish my career at BAE, and I resigned. And I've now ended up in another company in the defence industry, and it's been a challenge. It's been a challenge after working somewhere for 34 years. But my God, I'm having fun here as well.
Yeah. The rise through the ranks, what was that like, that change, and how did that change you? And, you know, I've always known you as quite a bold, instinctive person, you know, that you pick your battles, but you weren't frightened of you know, calling people out if you thought, you know, they were wrong in any way. So
I think you just said that I was quite bold and spontaneous.
Yeah.
I think you used those words. Do you know what? I had a coach a few years ago, and I made a comment to her. I operate based on gut.
Yeah.
A little bit like you described me.
Yeah.
And she said, she really challenged me and said, I think you're doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah.
You're not doing it on your gut. You're doing it on 30 years experience.
Yeah.
And that for me was one of those light bulb moments. The 30 years I had in comms, I put posters up. I did everything. I literally did everything, from event management to external PR. I did it all. So actually, I do think you get to a point in your career like, no, I know what I'm talking about, and then you're more confident.
Yeah.
But it took me a long time to get to that point. I looked after one of the sectors, and I remember being in my first meeting, and my then MD took me to one side after the meeting and said, you were really quiet in that meeting, Alison. You didn't contribute in the way that I thought you would. And I said, I'm just a bit intimidated, to be honest. I was the only female in the room, and they were all engineers, they were all scientists, they were all really, really clever. They all went to university. And his counsel to me was, in 3 to 6 months' time, you'll realise that they're as insecure as you, and actually your voice counts. And that was really sound advice that he gave me.
Yeah.
And I draw back on that a lot. He was a really inspirational leader to me, and gave me the confidence that my voice is worth listening to.
Yeah. I think one of the things that you've always been able to do is question and put clearly that if you don't get something, you don't get it, and not as a criticism, but like, explain it to me, or you're not, it's not landing. But to do it in those circles and to say I don't get it must the first time you do it must be doing.
It is, and it's still hard now. I was talking to one of my team only a couple of days ago. I was getting really frustrated, because he was trying to articulate the narrative, and it just didn't make sense to me. I don't know if I was a storyteller in a previous life, but if I don't understand it, I don't feel I can give the organisation justice to explain it properly. And just an aside story, and this is quite a long time ago, but I remember there was a drive to cut down on the number of near misses at work.
Yeah.
And there'd been a couple of incidents where women had fallen over, or females had fallen over because they had heels on. So the automatic response was, let's ban heels. So I'm sat in this meeting, I was getting more and more annoyed. And I know this is on video, so you can see me, but I'm actually 5 foot. And at that point, I was a little bit into power dressing, and I certainly needed my heels. And I was absolutely livid because they weren't treating me as an adult.
Right.
To make a decision on what shoes I wear. So, based on that, I voiced that I was uncomfortable, and I said, let me go away and think of a different way of having this conversation.
Yeah.
And one simple thing that we did, I put a blog out. And I put a blog out saying how angry I was that the company was thinking of banning heels.
Yeah.
I'm an adult. I choose how to be safe. And it went viral.
Broke the intranet, didn't it?
Oh my God. I was inundated with messages. I couldn't walk across site where everybody was like pointing out my shoes. And I know it's a really simple campaign, but it created a conversation, and then evidence, the data showed us that near misses were going down.
Right.
And it's because we forced a conversation. But then we took it one bit further. I rang Timpson's up and said, can you do me a deal? If you can you get, and it was before all these benefit packages. So I rang Timpson's and said, do you want to become part of this campaign? Can you offer all our employees a discount to get the high heels fixed?
Yeah.
And it just rolled and it became viral. I hate to think after 34 years of leaving BAE that I'm just known as the heels lady. But I love those campaigns that just make people stop and think.
Yeah.
I know when we've done a good job as a team when people are like, what's this about? Let's have a conversation about it.
Yeah, and it gives people the tools to do that.
But that goes back to organisation complexity.
Yeah.
That's not technical complexity. That's human complexity.
Yeah, and it's difficult to kind of, I don't know, it's difficult to kind of manage, isn't it, sometimes?
There's no wrong or right answer because we're all human beings and we all think differently and want different things. Some people might have wanted the ban on the heels.
When did trusting your own judgment, that advice that you'd been given, when did you start feeling confident, and what changed in you, do you think?
Do you know what I think helped me is moving around. And I know it was only in one organisation, but when you move around, you can sort of rebrand yourself.
Yeah.
If you're stuck in one job for years and years and years, you've got a certain brand. And I knew early on, because lots of people knew me from my secretary days or my typing pool days. I knew early on I'd probably have to leave from the site I was operating in because I'd never be recognised as a comms leader. I'd always be the girl who did well out of the typing pool.
That's my wife talks about, you've got to change the story about yourself. You know, if you're the person who loves cakes, or has that reputation, people will bring you a cake all the time, and you've got to change. You know, if you want to stop that from happening, you've got to change the story about yourself.
And what was really empowering, and sorry, I'm sounding a massive advocate for coaching at the moment. But when I decided to leave my last company, my coach really helped me with my narrative, my personal narrative and my personal brand. So when I went in for interviews, I was really clear what I wanted my narrative to be.
Okay, so can we understand a little bit about that process even, and how what did you think about your personal brand before, and how did it change?
I don't think it's changed that much, but the way you articulate it is different. So even today, I've talked a lot about what we've done, and actually, as part of my narrative, the value that I bring is I can make the complex understandable. I can make connections from shop floor to boardroom. I can inspire change. And that's different than I did a Draw the Line campaign. I did. So actually, I go back to my belief in a narrative. Because you behave differently when you've got that narrative.
And I think you were probably one of the first people who showed me the Silence Sinek video a dozen years ago that went viral. That why we do stuff is so important. Speaking truth to power is a valuable asset and a great attribute to have, but obviously it's double-edged as well. It must have come at a cost sometimes.
Yes, there's been moments where I'll be honest, people have challenged me, who do you think you are? You're not an engineer, you're not a scientist, and it hurts. I have had sleepless nights when I'm like, oh God, I shouldn't have challenged, I should have done that differently. But I've got a job to do, and I've got an important job to do. And therefore, it's the organisation's decision if they carry on with something that I fundamentally disagree on. And there has been, I'd say, only a number of things in my whole career where I have, all right, I fundamentally disagree with this, but I will toe the party line. But I've been really clear that I am doing it I am towing the party line, but I fundamentally, as an individual, don't agree with what we're doing. And that really sits uncomfortable because I've got a big value of fairness. It drives me. We've got to be fair. So I think it's less than a handful of occasions where I feel I've copped out. Even that terminology, copped out, you can feel how... had to toe the party line, despite your better judgment. Let's move on. Your current role at AWE puts employee experience right alongside corporate communications, and it's a kind of really meaningful evolution from internal comms, which was always seen as kind of like the baby sister of external comms, and you put great store in certainly in these large organisations that you've been involved in employee experience, and part of that is the communication of stuff. Where does that come from, do you think, and explain the role for us? So I am super passionate about employee experience. It's the corporate comms excites me absolutely. put in the ingredients, employee experience, and that's where you get the power.
Right.
And I truly believe that, and I think it's something that we all need to consider. So when I came out of corporate for my sabbatical, one of the things I did was create a employee experience team, and this is about really understanding what is the experience for an employee. So again, I'll use the example of performance management. So the experience sometimes, not always, and organisations are improving, but the experience of performance management is usually twice a year. You're dragged into a room. Sometimes you get feedback from your manager that is a total shock to you because you think you've been doing well. And that is the experience. If you know that experience, your comms will be different. The way you communicate that performance management time is here again, you will communicate that really different. And actually, you might not do it twice a year. You're doing it frequently. And that, for me, is where the power of employee experience with corporate comms and HR all come together. I see it as a Venn diagram with experience in the middle, and corporate comms overlapping and HR overlapping. Employee experience is the power.
We've talked in the past about how employee experience and drilling into it, and learning from employees about their experience can be a driver for business growth and business success.
Absolutely. If you listen, and I mean listen intently, it will inform your communication strategy. If employees are saying they don't understand the direction of the company, okay, what are we going to do about it?
Rather than just being broadcast mode. Just that listening mode. But I guess you have to embed that listening function within the organisation somehow to be effective.
And within my current organisation, listening sits within employee experience. But it doesn't mean to say they're the only ones who are listening.
Right.
And I think I'll go back to my point before. How is corporate comms, employee experience, HR helping managers understand their responsibilities of engaging with their teams? Corporate comms is not responsible for communicating everything to everyone.
No.
Line managers play a massive role in this. And what are we doing to help them?
We had somebody on from BA Systems probably about a year ago, and they were saying that's the essence of their job is helping the line manager.
And you just think what that line manager has to cope with every day. So they're getting issues coming from bottom up, they're getting issues coming from peers, and they're getting issues coming top down. They are getting it from everywhere, and then we say, "Oh, can you get your team together and talk about well-being for a week?" Think about their experience. They're getting it from every single direction. So us just communicating more at them to communicate. Just think what it means for them on a day-to-day basis. That must be really hard.
So, I mean, in your role, you must have, various functions coming along. We need this campaign, Alison. We need this. We need a poster on this. We need
all day, every day.
So, how do you triage that? And clearly, you know what the business needs to communicate from a strategy point of view, and how that fits in. But then, how do you take the functional experience and then the employee experience and meld it? How do you triage and get an effective communications plan together?
It's hard. I come back to organisations usually have a strategy and a business plan. It's a bit of a blunt instrument, but how is this piece of communication helping the business achieve the business plan and strategy. And it's as simple as that. And if we haven't got the narrative about why it's helping the business, we shouldn't be communicating it.
So that's a test you hold any kind of piece of communication. It's got to fit into, there's got to be some kind of strategic alignment. It might be 5 pillars or 7 pillars or whatever, but it gets crossed off the list if it's just it doesn't fit into that kind of strategic alignment piece.
I think it should be crossed off the list.
Right.
The other thing, and I'm talking personally here, and other corporate comms leads may not struggle with this, but I'm sure they do, is people wanting airtime and deciding what gets airtime and what doesn't. And I'm watching there's lots of things going on at the moment, but I do watch in awe actually how government comms grids topics.
Yeah.
I haven't achieved it yet, but it is around what gets airtime and when.
Yeah.
We're getting there, but that does go back to the confidence thing. You have to have confidence to say, I know it's really important to you. I know this project is really important to you, but this is more important for the organisation at the moment. And we'll come to you, but it might be in a few months' time because this has got to be the priority for the organisation at the moment.
Yeah, and we can't bamboozle people with 100 different messages.
Exactly, and overwhelm them.
Yeah, when actually they're here to do whatever it is they're here to do. I guess the other thing that you've got to be in your bonnet when we were talking before was around the value, and it goes back, I guess, back to the data as well, and that is it value for money, that tactical output and how do you measure that, and are you bringing that kind of rigour to people's thinking now? I'm
not there yet. Right. Not there yet. I think few. Well, I'm sure that there's some organisations that are absolutely whiz, but where I've worked have been traditional manufacturing organisations, so it is slightly different. It's asking the budget questions. It really is about asking the budget questions. It's around, okay, we're doing an all-employee event. How much is that per head?
Yeah.
What will be different when we've done the all-employee event? How do we know it's value for money?
Yeah.
Do you know how much this function costs the company per month?
Yeah.
Do you think they'll say that they're getting value for money from us? It's those, and I think it's. I probably go back to my upbringing. You made your money work for you, and that, I think, I go back to being a business leader. You've got to care about the commercials.
Yeah.
You've got to care that you are adding value, not doing stuff.
We're very big on measurement here. We work with Steph Bridgman, who's been a guest on this podcast a couple of times now, to really drill into that. And you mentioned that, what do we want people to think, what do we want people to see, what we want people to do, that kind of thinking, and how you measure those is really important.
I have a really good team, really good intent, everything. I think there's a piece on how do corporate communications educate leaders about what our role is.
Yeah.
So it's a partnership rather than a transactional service, and that is something that I grapple with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, we are a service, but it should be in partnership. We're an enabler.
Yeah. And done right, you really do enable. I guess as we come to the end, and we could. I could chat for hours, but I know you're incredibly busy, so I won't keep you too long. But if you reflect on the past 25 years plus working in this world, What do you wish you'd known 25 years ago that you could tell yourself now?
What would I have told my 21-year-old self who just started in comms? Spend more time understanding how the business works and ticks.
Right.
Because comms can be seen as a bolt-on, and I'd have spent more time. So how does that manufacturing process work? What does it mean? How do we make our money?
Yeah.
And that's what I mean about being commercially savvy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'd have done that. I'd have believed in myself a little bit more.
Right.
You know, I know everybody thinks I'm really confident, I'm bold, I'm brave. But when you sat behind that closed door and you're thinking about how do I challenge in the right way so people see the good intent. And I don't get it right now. I genuinely don't always get it right now. I try really hard at it. But I know sometimes I think I've got a brand of being quite blunt, and it's something I work really hard at. But also I'm just like, get on with it. Yeah.
It's a passion to cut through things. I guess we've done that looking back. Let's look to the future. What do you see the shape of that in-house employee experience or the comms leader in these complex organisations looking like in the next 10 years? Or what are the big challenges do you foresee?
I'd like us to be recognised as a trusted advisor, and I'd love us to be seen as the custodian of reputation and narrative.
Yeah.
Coming back to my narrative, that's what I'd like us to be seen. I love it when a senior exec rings me up and like, we're thinking of this. That's where we need to be.
Yeah.
I do think AI is going to change the world of corporate comms. I genuinely do. And I know we'll fight it. I know.
Yeah.
And it'll never give us everything that we need. But my God, it's going to transform the way of work. It really is.
Yeah.
Little things. I fed in my company narrative.
Yeah.
And then I'll put a story into AI and say, out of a score of 1 to 10, how well is that bringing that narrative alive?
Yeah.
That's powerful stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Exciting or frightening?
Oh no, exciting, always. I'm a run to person rather than a run from. And that, again, going back to communications, we've got to understand human beings. There are people who would prefer to run away from something, i.e. that's broke.
Yeah.
And then there are people who like to run to something, which I am.
Yeah.
Give me excitement, I'll run towards it.
I look forward to hearing the adventures from that journey. Thank you, Alison Ramsay. Thank you so much for your time today, and look forward to speaking to you soon on many more of these adventures.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for listening to PR in the Real World. If you've enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you could subscribe to the podcast and leave us a quick review. Your support really helps spread the word and reach more marketing and PR professionals just like you. And don't forget to share this podcast with your colleagues or anyone who'd benefit from the insights we share. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time for more tips, strategies and real world stories from the PR frontlines.